And welcome back. And as you can imagine, top of mind for many people still this morning is, of course, discussions around the appointment of the new finance minister, Tito Mboweni. Now, Labour and also business sectors have welcomed the appointment of Tito Mboweni as the new Minister of Finance. Now, this comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa announced former Minister Nhlanhla Nene's resignation yesterday. And to talk more about these developments, we joined now via Skype by Advocate Paul Hoffman, who's a Director of Accountability Now. And here in studio with me is Mr. Sipho Pityana, President of Business Unity South Africa. Gentlemen, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Sakina. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Advocate Hoffman, straight into it. Did the President have much of a choice here?
I don't think so. I think if you look at the reasons that he gave, then it's very clear that he was concerned that the circumstances swirling around Minister Nene were not conducive to good governance, nor were they conducive to re-establishing trust in the government. Now, if you see the choice that he has made in place of Minister Nene, then you can see that he's probably gone for the candidate with the most gravitas, the most experience and weight in the field of possible candidates who were bandied around in the last couple of days. You see, once the President says that he is concerned to re-establish trust, then he is implicitly saying that the public's trust in government has been lost in the latter part of the Zuma years, and that is one of the tasks that he is facing. But if he's going to be consistent about it, then I can think of at least 3 ministers who have done a lot worse than Mr. Nene. After all, Mr. Nene was just caught in a white lie, which he corrected when he was put under oath, whereas the other 3 have all been caught lying on oath, which is a far more serious matter if you are trying to re-establish trust in government.
Caught in a white lie, Mr. Pityana, but this speaks to ethics and the trust issue that Advocate Hoffman also touches on. So, isn't it revealing of us as South Africans and just how low we've set the bar, that, you know, when someone does the right thing, we actually are surprised, number one, and 2, we applaud them for doing what they ought to have done in the first place?
Well, this is a groundbreaking step by any public leader that a Minister of Finance who was caught in a lie decided that it was time to call it a day. It was one of the very few occasions where you had a public representative come out in public and apologize to the public for having done so and follow through with a step of resignation. I hope that it sends a very important signal to others in cabinet and others in public places who are who've been caught in a similar position and were sitting there defending. But
this proves my point that the bar is so low. When it comes to ethical leadership, we don't seem to expect much.
Well, we know that. I mean, that's why we're having such a serious, deep-seated problem of corruption, both in the private and the public sector, in the unions, in civil society, across the board. It's because the bar is set so low. And I think that one of the positives that we should take from this is that he's beginning to raise the bar. Of course, we are all disappointed because we were out there mobilized in support of him as a victim of the champion of corruption that Zuma was. And of course, what he was not coming out with it was the truth about his own involvement and culpability in it all.
Which brings me to the next question, and I'm going to ask you and then I'll come to Advocate Hoffman. Firstly, is it enough for Nhlanhla Nene to resign without us knowing the exact details of what those meetings were the Guptas were about?
Well, first of all, I hope that he will take full advantage of the commission, of the Zondo Commission's processes and disclose what was the conversation in those meetings that he had with the Guptas? Because the issue is not so much that he met with the Guptas. The issue is, what is it that was talked about? Were there deals done? Were there favors asked for? Did he follow through on those favors? At what point did he decide that it was no longer good enough to do so? The fact that he hid the meetings suggests that there was something untoward in the conversations that happened there. So that's where public trust comes from. Is not so much that the meetings happened, is what happened in the meetings. Absolutely. Secondly, as we say in the Busa statement, that we are very concerned about the fact that there are so many questions that are being raised about the PIC. Now, the former chairman of the PIC, that Minister Nhlanhla Nene was, there are all kinds of allegations that are made. He must be afforded an opportunity to answer to those allegations. And the only way to do that is to institute a commission of inquiry into all kinds of allegations that are being made against the PIC. Remember that the PIC is present almost in every enterprise in the South African economy. It looms large. So we can't afford to have such a big, significant, the biggest asset manager with investment across the economy having a cloud of corruption suspicions hanging over it.
And I don't think there's much to disagree with there, Advocate Hoffman. But coming back to the question of what was revealed, what Nhlanhla Nene did reveal was that he actually halted the signing of that nuclear deal. However, there were some declassified cabinet meetings minutes that were erroneously distributed last week to some members of the media. And looking through those, it would seem as though Cabinet had pushed through with the nuclear build procurement. The strategy was in place. They had already spoken about, the funding model. They had spoken about mitigating some of the costs and circumstances around this deal. Those were declassified cabinet minutes. So what does that tell us about all the protagonists, which are the cabinet ministers?
I can't resist
here.
the temptation to go to
I'll come back to you. I'll put it to you, but let me go with Advocate Hoffman first.
Yes, I think that it is important to note that in terms of the Constitution, the Cabinet has collective responsibility. The nuclear deal was stopped because of litigation to stop it. And that renders those Cabinet minutes a little bit moot at this stage, because the deals that were done at the time that Minister Nene was still in the Cabinet have been set aside by the High Court. Coming back, though, to the fate of Minister Nene, may I just draw your viewers' attention to the fact that the Public Protector is currently seized with a complaint of a breach of the Executive Ethics Code by Minister Nene, a complaint which has been laid by the Democratic Alliance, and she is obliged to investigate the allegations around whether there has been a conflict of interest in relation to a deal that was done for the benefit of Minister Nene's son, should I say former Minister Nene's son. So that investigation, I would suggest, makes it unnecessary to have a commission of inquiry as far as Mr. Nene's involvement is concerned. But I agree with Sipho that it is going to be necessary to get to the bottom of a lot of allegations of shenanigans in the PIC that are being bandied about by the UDM and the EFF as well. So let's hope that a commission of inquiry finds the facts. We all know that a commission of inquiry can only make recommendations which may or may not be accepted by the government, which is a weakness in that route.
Well, Advocate Hoffman, where I disagree with you is that, the cabinet, declassified cabinet minutes are rendered moot, because this speaks to the integrity of our ministers. Because it's one thing to come out into the public and say, well, I do not support the nuclear build program, I resisted this, that, and the other. When you had the opportunity to do that, to register your discontent and your opposition to it within that cabinet meeting, you did not do so. Because if anybody did, it certainly is not noted in those minutes. So does that not speak to ethics?
Yes, it certainly does speak to the ethics. What I was doing was stopping your viewers from choking on their cornflakes because they think that the nuclear deal is still in place. The nuclear deal is not in place, yes, in spite of the cabinet minutes. But your point is well taken. It does reflect on the lack of integrity of cabinet ministers who could have seen that this was a suicidal deal in financial terms, and yet just sat there and said, yes, President Zuma, 3 bags full.
And then, of course, there was a message sent out, 2 messages afterwards, recalling and asking us as journalists not to use the contents. But we're journalists. We've seen it. We can't unsee it. And I also consulted with my journalism professor just to check on our ethics as journalists in terms of using this, just for the record. But Mr. Pityana, you wanted to weigh in on this as well.
I think that it's a very important piece of information. Was the state capture project a Zuma project, or was it a project of the government of the day? Now, it says that the Zondo Commission must seek access to cabinet minutes of the entire tenure of the Zuma administration to establish which other decisions were decisions of cabinet that instructed ministers to embark on acts of illegality that were unconstitutional, that got the stamp of approval of the cabinet. So it does suggest that not only was Zuma driving this, but he used cabinet and other government structures to drive through the state capture project. So we won't get a full picture until the Zondo Commission gets full access not only to this minute of cabinet, but to others too.
Absolutely. And then just coming to Tito Mboweni, the new Minister of Finance, and of course, he comes in at a very difficult time. We're talking about recession. We're talking about unemployment numbers upwards of 40% if you're looking at the expanded notation. It is a disastrous situation. We have our economic growth forecast actually revised downwards, less than 1%, which is an absolute catastrophe. But what would you say, Sipho Pityana, he should have as his main focus coming into this job?
Well, this is a safe pair of hands. This is a good set of brains to actually help us navigate our way out of a very difficult situation. Tito is a very thoughtful economist, and he knows Treasury, he knows South African economy, he knows the international markets. He's known there too. So we couldn't have asked for better. My view is that he will appreciate that the path out of this is going to be a difficult one. There's not going to be a quick fixes, and that we need to buckle down and accept that we're going to take some painful decisions, which would include contraction of some of the public sector spending across the board. That means culling out wastage and being quite ruthless with corrupt practices that are taking huge amounts of resources from the state, excesses that are just perfectly avoidable, and a whole range of those. And I think that we want to engage with him on some of those initiatives. He also would know what kind of things we need to do to jumpstart the economy, to begin to look at in that medium-term budget framework, what are the kind of initial steps that you can begin to take to signal that you're going to direct the investments where it matters to begin to kickstart the economy. But of course, the biggest thing is to look at the budget statement next year, because then he will have an opportunity to consult with all of us and also consult with other cabinet ministers. But we need to get out of this idea that there's going to be a quick fix. This is a very difficult place, and we need to make sure that we are quite meticulous and deliberate about how we move out of it.
Good, Hoffman. Evidently, the market's happy with this appointment and business would be happy. But what about the ordinary South African, the layman on the street, who is struggling at the moment, buckling under pressure of rising costs of living?
Yes, I agree with Sipho that one of the initial tasks of our new Minister of Finance is going to be to tackle corruption through the financial system and through the setting aside of deals that were done that were corruptly negotiated or irregularly negotiated. He can claw back a great deal of money in a very short time if he looks into the CIEX report into malfeasance at the end of apartheid, if he looks into the arms deals, if he looks into the Eskom procurements in the time that Eskom was being raped by the Guptas, if he looks into the People's Tribunal report on economic corruption in South Africa, if he reads those things and the litigation that the Cape Town Peace Centre has instituted against the government to undo the biggest of the arms deals, he will find ways to claw back enough money to bring down the petrol price, to pay for free tertiary education, and to get South Africa out of the hole that it has been put in by the Zuma administration.
I'm curious to hear how you think he's going to do that, because if it were that simple, why haven't his predecessors actually done that?
Well, his predecessors, with the exception of Mr. Nene in the last few months, have all been part of the Zuma Collective, and the Zuma Collective's approach to litigation has always been to protract the litigation for as long as possible. But he is a defendant in the Cape Town Peace Centre case, and if that case is handled correctly, as we suggest it should be, there will be the opportunity of getting back all the money that was paid to British Aerospace, plus interest, in exchange for getting rid of a handful of aircraft that we've never needed in the first place.
Mr. Pityana, I'm not even going to go into the gambling part of it, but what are the chances of this happening?
Of what happening?
Of Minister Mboweni actually recovering all of those monies and having the political fortitude to actually go after it?
Well, I think that one of the major differences with Minister Mboweni is that he's senior in the party, and you need the political party fully behind you as you carry through this. He enjoys respect and confidence in the economic cluster. So he carries enormous weight also in the alliance, and it's not surprising that he's got the kind of backing that he got with his appointment. That's what you need. You need somebody who has that presence, and the president needs somebody leading the economic cluster who has that kind of gravitas and presence. So one would expect that he would be able to persuade his colleagues in cabinet that these are the things that need to be done. We need to cut the wastage. We need to cut irregular and fruitless expenditure.
We've been hearing this for the longest time. We've heard of austerity, cut down on this, that, and the other. It never happens.
Well, that's exactly the point. He knows that that has to happen. He's been through a dispensation in government where that deal was driven very hard and so successfully with very positive results. We saw what happened in the last years of the Mbeki administration, where growth was at about 5.5%. Redistribution was happening. You had the fastest growth of the black middle class. The fundamentals of the macroeconomic framework were in place. From a situation when we took over in 1994, when the economy was in a perilous state. So we brought the finance minister who actually has seen it being done before. It is possible to do it.
Final question, and we have 15 seconds literally. Does the axing of Minister Nene, does that now give the president some sort of segue to perhaps cull some of the other ministers who, as Advocate Hoffman pointed out earlier, may have been guilty of worse, at least that we know of on the record? Does this give him that opportunity? Advocate Hoffman, 15 seconds, and then Mr. Pityana.
Yes, I certainly hope so. If the president wants to be seen to be consistent, then the heads on the chopping block are those of Malusi Gigaba, Batabili Smallanyana Skeletons Dlamini, and Beki Chele, who was fired for dishonesty and incompetence when he was Commissioner of Police.
Mr. Pityana?
Well, I think that the good thing is that everybody knows that Nhlanhla Nene was the president's ally. And is taking a fall on this matter. So other ministers who are sitting there, who know that there are revelations that are going to come, better make sure that they leave, because it's quite clear that if you are prepared to have your ally go, it must be so that those that are not necessarily your allies should go too, because you won't be accused of embarking on a witch hunt against your opponents.
Mr. Sipho Pityana, Advocate Hoffman, thanks so much to both of you for that very stimulating discussion this morning. Well, that's where we have to leave it. And of course, up next will be the news with Leanne.